Welcome and thank you for joining today's web conference, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Please note all audience members are currently in a listen-only mode to minimize background noise. There will be Q&A at the end of the presentation, and at that time, I'll provide instructions on how to ask verbal questions. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To send a note, please click the Participants menu at the top of your screen and opt to send note to all presenters. If you are logged in using the web-based application, use the Notes tab on the right-hand side of your screen and address your notes to all moderators. If you require any technical assistance, please either call our help desk at 888-796-6118 or send a note to the ATT CES operator via the software. At this time, I would like to turn the call over to Rebecca Lauster, Senior Management Analyst. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending upon where you are at in the country. I just wanted to take this time today to welcome everyone here. And this is the third and final RCPP webinar that we are doing in conjunction with the fiscal year 2018 APF that's been released. So today's webinar is going to be a little bit shorter as far as the slide presentation, and I will spend a lot more time answering any questions that you may have. I'm not going to go kind of as in-depth as I have previously unless there are specific questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. So then I'm going to go ahead and get started. Lauren, next slide, please. So the first thing I really wanted to mention to everybody that is on the call is that RCPP is not a grant program. So there are very specific things that RCPP cannot do that normal grant programs do, such as pay for administrative costs, outreach, education, travel, equipment, things of that nature. So that is something that I, again, just wanted to reiterate to everyone, that RCPP is not a grant program. Next slide, please. So here's where we're currently at right now. Everybody that is on this call is looking at applying for our application process. So again, it is a two-phase application process. Our annual announcement for program funding, otherwise known as the APF, was released in January of this year, and it set the due dates for when the pre-proposal applications are due, which is actually coming up here in just several weeks on April 21st by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, along with when the full proposal applications are due. And so what is going to happen here is that you're going to go ahead and you're going to submit your pre-proposal application. There are three components to this application process, two of which you will download via the NRCS.USDA.gov website by looking up the RCPP program. So on there, you're going to look for our data entry tool. Our data entry tool is going to collect all of your kind of generic information about you as the lead partner, about the other partners. It's going to collect some of your budget information. It's also where you're going to put your PDF narrative. So there is I believe it's 11 or 12 questions this year for narrative questions that you will be answering about your project. That PDF narrative is really the story of what it is you're trying to do and how you're going to accomplish it. Within there, you're also going to tell us, what's the time frame, how are you going to do it, what are the partners' roles that you're bringing with you to the table during that pre-proposal. You will then also be uploading a map of your project outline. Gives us a better idea of what we're looking at as far as geographic scope. Once our proposal application deadline passes, which again, Friday, April 21st at 5 p.m., we will then start the review process. So we're going to go through two phases as it's laid out in our APF, where we're going to have a technical review team review each of the proposals and make a recommendation from there to leadership. And then leadership will do their review process and have final selections made. That is anticipated to happen in late June, that we will announce who is being invited back for a full proposal. So full proposal applications you must be invited back for. It is not open to just anyone at that point. And in that time frame, or in that particular application process, there is another set of questions that you will be answering to tell us more about the project. Again, really laying out that story, going further in depth than what you do in the pre-proposal project, because at that point we also expect that you're really having this project fleshed out, well thought out, and ready to go if you are awarded, if you are selected for a award agreement. So that will then close in the end of August for the full proposals. The full proposals will then go through the exact same review process that the pre-proposals go through. And we are hoping to announce our selected projects to move forward to the agreement phase by November of this year, in November of this year. And so after you make it through both of those application periods, we then enter what we look at as kind of an agreement period, where we're going to negotiate out everything that you've told us. We're going to talk about the logistics of how does all of that work, does it make sense, anything that we as NRCS need to kind of talk about that maybe we cannot do based on our programs, things of that nature. So that's what will happen in that period. Next slide, please. So one of the big things to make sure all of you are aware of, and hopefully you are thinking about already, is that all of your projects need to be based on natural resource concerns. Each of the projects must achieve specific, measurable natural resource results. So these are the resource concerns that are listed in our APF. Depending upon which funding pool you are in, there will be specific resource concerns. So the national funding pool has one set, and if you are applying for the critical conservation area, which is the CCA, that will have, each CCA has a very specific set of natural resource concerns. If you do not see a natural resource concern that is falling within your project, that either means that you either need to think about what is the resource concern, and how do these current ones for your specific funding pool fall in line, or perhaps you need to talk to your state conservationist about what else may be out there to help you. Next slide, please. So some of the best practices. So everybody on here should know that our APF laid out the 4 pillars. Our 4 pillars are participation, contribution, innovation, and solutions. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit here very briefly about kind of what are we looking for when we talk about those 4 things. So under participation, so there's 2 ways to look at this. So the first is looking at new customers that have not used NRCS programs. So your project and your outreach plan is really well thought out and really well developed to bring in people that have never used an RCS program. That would be the first. The second area that you potentially could be looking at is new partners to conservation funding. So that is going out with your partner side and bringing in new partners that have not traditionally played in this kind of area. So for instance, you could be looking at private foundations. You could be looking at community foundations. So as I mentioned earlier, RCPP is very, very different in what we can actually pay for. So we cannot pay for administrative or indirect costs. We don't buy equipment such as computers. We don't buy new trucks. We don't buy certain things like that. So we've actually had successful projects now that have gone out, and they've actually been able to partner with new partners to kind of provide some of that funding. So we really want you as a partner thinking about this, thinking about who do I need to bring to the table, how much is my project really going to cost, and where do I need to find those funds? And so that's what that participation in new partners to conservation funding is talking about. Next slide, please. So innovation. So this is innovation and partner contribution. I use this word new science, and I think it's a little misleading, and I probably need to change that. I'm really sorry. New tools, new monitoring techniques. So that's innovation and partner contribution. So that's really where you as a partner have someone on board with you in the project that's really interested in trying out a monitoring technique that is not currently in NRCS's suite of monitoring. The only monitoring that NRCS can actually pay for currently is edge of field monitoring. So, any water quality, in-stream, anything like that, we would not be able to pay for, but it could be a partner contribution. And there's a lot of value to some of these things that, new tools that you want to test out and see. Does this make sense? Does this work? Are we implementing conservation faster, by using this kind of tool? So what NRCS is also looking at here is, are there things that are coming out of our RCPP projects that maybe we need to look at and consider implementing, into our suite of kind of knowledge currently? So that's really where innovation and the partner contribution can come into play. Innovation and outreach and education strategies. So again, outreach and education is this big area that we are expecting our partners, you, to be bringing this really fantastic strategy on how are you going to sell your project? If you are selected and awarded, how are you going to go find those customers? How are you going to make this happen? Are you targeting historically underserved? Are you targeting, rural economies that by doing this project, we're improving drinking water and we're improving agricultural land and we're improving water quality in this watershed? Those are kind of just some ideas to think about out there. But again, it's really you coming to the table with this really thought out, well laid out strategy that you can then go implement very quickly. And so we can see a lot of innovation in that. The other area is innovation in our NRCS standards and specifications. So one kind of confusing area is that when people think of innovation, sometimes they're like, well, we just want to do things very differently than NRCS has ever done. And a lot of times it's outside of our normal standards and specifications. So we have standards and specifications that are based on science and research. And so if you're proposing to do something different to them, that's okay, but you need to start having that conversation now. Hopefully you've already been talking to your state conservationist or your RCPP program manager in whatever state you're working in to talk about these, because there's a system in place now where if you're proposing to do something different there, we automatically need to be notified of that and start conversations with our science and technology division to start looking at, is that a feasible thing? Does that make sense? How would we go about doing it? Starting to have those conversations now. In some cases, we've even found that, yes, you think that you want to do something innovative to a standard and specification, but then we've actually found out that that's already being done in another part of the country. And so, again, that's where our science and technology specialists are able to say, oh, we can already do that. That's already applicable. It just may not be happening in that particular state or that particular region. So, again, it's just bringing together some new thoughts. But those are ways to look at innovation, I think, that make it easier for you as a partner to bring that innovation forward. Next slide, please. So contribution. So this is, again, another of our 4 pillars. And so we're looking really here at 2 things. The first is what new non-federal dollars are coming in. So we know that there are projects out there that you are partnering with other federal agencies to do some amazing work. That's okay. But what we also want to see is what what work and what partners are coming to the table with a contribution to accomplish your project. Realistically, what this helps to show us is that there's community support and community buy-in of your project area. You're able to show that you've got all of these organizations, a local high school, if there's a creek that's running through them, that's able to do something, or a university or college, that wants to do a contribution for certain things. We've had private utility companies come forward, or municipalities come forward. We've had dam authorities come forward as partners. We've had, like I've mentioned previously, private foundations. So there's a lot of interesting partners out there. And one of the things that we're hearing from a lot of our RCPP projects from past years is that RCPP is really allowing them to open the doors to new funding sources. So, by going forward and saying, hey, I've got this project, this is what we're trying to do, can we bring you on board as a partner? This is how we could see your participation and your contribution being used for our project, and then talking about what is that contribution worth, how much can come forward with that partner. Our RCPP goal is that for every NRCS federal dollar spent, we're seeing an equal contribution. So we're looking for that 1-to-1. Again, we would like to see more new non-federal dollars come forward, but we also do recognize that federal dollars from other agencies may be used as a contribution. Now, this is where it does get tricky. Federal contributions, or any contribution, during the pre-proposal round does not require a commitment letter. But during the full proposal, if you are asked back, you are going to be required to receive a commitment letter from every partner that is laying out that they are committing X dollars to be used for X way in your project. So that means that if it's a federal agency, you're going to need to get that federal agency to give you a letter that says that you can use X dollars X way. If you can't, then that contribution cannot be counted. So that's during the full proposal round that we expect that firm commitment to start to come in from those partners. Next slide, please. Solutions. So this is our last pillar. So again, all of our solutions that you're bringing forward, we really need them to be science-based, but there needs to be a science-based approach to it. So what we don't necessarily want is we don't want you to think kind of pie in the sky and pluck an idea out, but there's nothing behind it that says this may work as a solution. The other thing that we really are looking for is that you have measurable solutions, that they are attainable, and they have to be attainable in a small window, i.e. 5 years for these RCPP agreements, and that they need to be geographically specific. So again, an example of this would be if you were proposing to address water quality across the 48 continental United States, so the lower 48, and you were requesting $10 million to do that. That goal may be a little bit big. Whatever solutions you're bringing forward probably are going to be diluted from the geographic size. But if you come forward and you say, I want to address water quality, specifically nitrogen or phosphorus or, sediment or whatever that may be in this watershed. And this watershed could be, cover 2 states, could cover 3 states. That's okay. Again, it's a geographically specific area. And you're saying that you want to see this reduced. Your strategic plan that maybe you already had written out was showing that in 5 years, if you started to implement these things, that we would be able to back a 50% reduction. Okay, that's and this is how we're going to measure that reduction, and this is how we're going to go achieve this goal. So again, all of our solutions need to be thought about in ways that they're science-based, that they're measurable, attainable in a 5-year time period, and that they're geographically specific. Next slide, please. So here's my recommendation. So right now, I'm hoping, because we're on April 5th, that all of you have already started communication with NRCS staff to discuss the project and the details. This is really important. I'm not sure that I can stress this enough to you guys. We've actually been doing several webinars also with partners that currently have RCPP projects, and one of the biggest tips that they give to anybody else is, or to anybody that is considering an RCPP project, is that communication with NRCS is key, because this is really where you're going to start to learn what can you do, what can't you do, how do we accomplish this, what kind of, is this really realistic for this particular program for us to be able to do. So again, communication now is going to be super critical. You also need to be able to understand how the NRCS programs work and how your project idea can work within the program. So RCPP, again, not a grant program. So you don't just get to come to the table and say, I want to reduce water quality, and I'm going to go put conservation buffers in this area. You have to come to the table and just say, I want to reduce water quality through sedimentation, and I would like to use the EQIP program to start to install conservation buffers along, this 12-mile stretch. Okay, great. That's fantastic. But you need to make sure that your project can work within NRCS programs. Okay, so it's really important, and that's, again, where communicating with the NRCS staff in the state that you're working in is really key. I've said this before, but you really want to make sure that you have realistic, measurable, and an attainable project in a 5-year time period. These agreements are really only 5 years long. So, again, coming to the table with, I'm going to do something that impacts 48 states. Maybe a little large, probably not really realistic, and how are you going to measure that in a 5-year period? Perhaps there's a project out there and we haven't heard of it yet. But again, think about it in that term. The other thing is that know your project. Know your project, and if it has community support around it, to implement it within that short time frame. So again, what we have seen in some projects is that when they come to the table, they haven't really been well thought out. They've not really been well planned, and the community buy-in was not there. That's really difficult to overcome in a 5-year project. So realistically, because you're going to spend, we've had projects where they've spent the first couple of years doing things that, had they done that previously, they would have been that much further along, and we would have been implementing and actually putting conservation out there on the ground and achieving your goals for these projects. So again, make sure that you know your project and that you have the community support to be able to implement it. That also includes making sure that you bring the right partners to the table to implement your project. So again, what we don't want to see is we don't want you to bring 150 partners to a table and they all are contributing very little, and they're probably going to become inactive, because maybe they weren't the appropriate ones to bring to the table. Instead, we'd rather you say, this is our project, this is our goals, these are what we need to accomplish it, and maybe that's bringing 10, 15, 20, whatever, 8, partners to the table, but they all are playing a very pivotal role. And they're all bringing contributions to the table that are, really important to implement that project. Those kinds of partnerships, when you start to tell us that story, that really gives us, lets us know that you've really thought about this. You have a good idea of how you're going to implement this project and what resources you need. So again, knowing your project, bringing the right partners, making sure you've got that financial contribution, that partner contribution coming with you, and that those solutions are really measurable, attainable, and specific. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to open it up for question and answers, and then Lauren, you can go to the next slide if you'd like.
If you wish to ask a question, please dial #2 on your phone keypad or select the raise hand emoticon from the top toolbar to be placed into the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At this time, please state your name and question. Again, that is #2 to enter the question queue. Alternatively, you may send a note by selecting the Participants menu at the top of your screen and opting to send note to all presenters. If you are logged in using the web-based application, use the Notes tab on the right-hand side of your screen and address your note to all moderators. And we do have our first caller in queue. Richard, please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know that if you have a project that is actually divided into 3 phases, and the first 2 phases are attainable in 5 years, would you be able to go forward with that?
As far as, would you submit a project for that? Is that what you're asking?
If it would be acceptable. Your statements earlier were that the project had to be attainable in 5 years, and
right.
I'm just saying the specific project that I'm working on would take longer than that if it was the full project, but it's actually divided into 3 parts, and so the first 2 parts would be attainable in 5 years, but the third phase would be down the road.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, it's whatever part potentially that you're submitting needs to be able to be completed within 5 years. That's perfectly fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have another caller in the queue. Missy, please go ahead.
Hi there. I was wondering how we estimate the total producers in our project area if the project area is as big as a watershed.
Yeah, so again, this is really where, so I'm not entirely sure how you kind of set your project up, but in some cases, we have seen where partners have, they've already divided their watershed up. They had priority areas already outlined, so they knew that they wanted to go out and target these 200 producers or these, 60 producers or whatever that area may be. We've also, and those are, again, ones that we typically find that they've had a plan, so they already kind of know this is where we want to target. The other way that you could really look at it is, this is how big your area is, your watershed area. This is what we're trying to achieve. What is the rate at which, most of these producers are going to kind of sign on for whatever it is that you're trying to do. So, that would be potentially a really great question also to ask, some of your partners if they work specifically in that area. If you have a conservation district, within that area that you're 1 or 2 maybe, or, depending on how big it is, they may have a better sense also. Conservation districts are the kind of the local feel for what potentially could be done. So that will kind of depend on, what your project is and how you're planning to accomplish it. Does that help you at all?
It does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And at this time, we have no further questions in queue, but I do see that a couple notes have come in.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and read those. Emily is asking, the APF mentions NRCS would give special consideration to environmental markets and conservation finance projects. Could you explain this consideration a bit more? Emily, so I'm not entirely sure of what the definition of special consideration is. We will consider, you know, if you have a project that's looking at doing environmental markets or potentially conservation financing projects. I will say conservation financing projects have been a little more challenging to kind of implement in the ones that we've seen come forward, just because, again, it ties back to how do we really implement it with a conservation program. Under RCPP, environmental markets, usually we can start to see those come in. So really what we were really trying to say there is that if you have these components as part of your project, you know, don't feel like you can't submit a project because of those. Scott is asking, is in-kind support allowed as a match? For example, the municipality was to go. So Scott, yes, in-kind support is allowed, but one of the things, we kind of put this out there, is that we don't actually consider RCPP contributions as match, because again, we are not a grant. And so when you actually say the word match, that comes with very specific regulations and things that kind of go in it. So we actually call it a contribution. And in-kind support is allowed to be used as a partner contribution. Beth, can you please highlight the differences, if any, between this year's application form and last year? So, Beth, there's actually absolutely no difference in the data entry tool, and the only difference is really showing up in the questions, the PDF narrative. We tried to flesh them out a little bit more to get more specific information, along with we added a brand new question that's looking at is the project already, or is the proposal being based off a project that's already been funded? You know, is this coming off of some other initiative? Things of that nature. So there's a brand new question in the PDF narrative. Emily, are private consultants eligible to get direct funding, or do they have to go through a different partner? Emily, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. So in the APF, there's actually the list of eligible partners that you could look at, and if you or your private consultant meets those eligibilities, then you would be eligible to apply for RCPP. Are there any other questions? Oh, we have another one. Cindy, our town has old and iron-based pipes we need to replace in our rural community. Would this be a good candidate if we proved water quality improvement? So, Cindy, for this particular kind, again, RCPP is designed to work. I don't know of anything that would provide piping for human populations, if that's what you're trying to do. Is that what you're trying to do, Cindy? None of our programs do that. That perhaps may be a better look at rural development. One of our sister agencies, perhaps they have some sort of program that might be able to help you if you're looking at specifically replacing those pipes for water quality. Cindy, okay, so I guess I'm not entirely sure what it is what kind of pipes you're trying to replace. And so, Cindy, I think the best bet that I have for you is that definitely make sure that you're talking to the state conservationist in the state that you're in, or the RCPP program manager. All of those numbers are listed in the APF at the back. I believe it's one of the appendixes. So you could find that information if you've not already started that conversation. And they would be the ones to really kind of answer those specific questions and be able to get a better handle of what your specific project is trying to do and if RCPP would be a good fit or not. Cindy, yeah, so I get the pipes, but what I'm not sure is what are the pipes being used for. So again, I'm going to go ahead and have you talk to your state conservationist on that one, or your RCPP program manager. Because again, there's a difference between like agricultural pipe usage, like for irrigation, animal watering, things of that nature. But if you're talking about it somehow in terms of drinking water, or I'm not entirely sure how it would be water quality, that's a different story. So Beth, I submitted one last year that was not funded. Has the focus changed at all from last year's focus, or can I pretty much submit last year's proposal with the answer? So Beth, you could, if you would like to, you could do that. One of the things that I would always strongly recommend, is that you really take a look at, what is the project trying to do, and, as I've mentioned, what we're looking for, is it meeting those things? Or do you believe that it's meeting those? And if so, go ahead and feel free to submit it again.
All right. And at this time, I'm not seeing any further questions. As a reminder, dial #2 to enter the question queue, or you may send in a note if you have a question. And Rebecca, I'm still not seeing anything new come into the queue.
Okay. Well, then, if there are no further questions, I am done, and I wish all of you good luck as we move forward, and thank you for your interest in RCPP.
Thank you to all our speakers and participants for joining today's call. This event has concluded, and you may now disconnect.